She just wants you to be yourself.
Yeah.
Well, welcome, Deron. I'm glad that we were able to work through those little technical difficulties there. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule to be with us today and share a little bit of your knowledge and a lot about your work and the inspiration that you take and the messaging that you're trying to share. Today we have a number of teachers and students on with us today. And one of the reasons that we record these sessions are because, you know, everybody has different schedules. And one of the things that we like to do is record the sessions so then the teachers can share them out. And today we have a number of art teachers who are very, very interested to hear, you know, some of your messaging around art and around identity and all of those things. So there are a number of questions that have been posed, but maybe before we get into that, Deron, you could tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm Gungihaga, Mohawk, Turtle Clan, Bear Clan. My family's from Ganawage. You cut out on me, Troy.
There you go.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah, it keeps on cutting out. Must be the signal. Yeah, my family's originally from Ganawage, so got a long history of being there. I'm the oldest of how many brothers? I got 4 brothers, so I'm the oldest, and I'm not going to say they look up to me, but they kind of take note of what I'm doing and try to do better than me. So it's kind of challenging. I've been doing art for over 40 years. Right now, I'm concentrating on fine art. Most of what I do centers around who I am, my culture, that sort of thing. I find that identity is really important to a person, and specifically to an artist. That's where you get all your ideas. That's everything that you draw upon to create your art. When people purchase art, they're not really purchasing the style. In a lot of cases, they're purchasing the person as and how they create their art and why they create the art and what they create their art about. I almost said they're purchasing a product, which I guess it is a product, but they're interested in the guts behind it. Why did you create it? That sort of thing.
And I think that's what a lot of people want to know. They can look at a piece of art and they see its beauty, but sometimes they have maybe a hard time interpreting that. I'm wondering, you know, how would you talk about your art and how people should maybe look at it?
Well, like I like to tell students that my art is based on my identity, on who I am, my culture, you know, my ceremonies, my experiences, and my beliefs. And you know, your beliefs are going to change. The things that you believe are going to change from one day to the next, or 1 month to the next. You're not the same person that you were 10 years ago or 5 years ago. So all of this is going to change, but your culture and your identity remains the same. So everything that you create, everything that I create, centers around my thoughts, and they're filtered through, you know, the way I view the world.
Oh, I really like that. You know, yeah. We change over time, but our identity, although it might be influenced by different things, our culture is the grounding point. It's that starting point, eh?
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, if you look at identity, if you look at an artist's identity, I find that a lot of, you know, people starting out, or a lot of young people, they have problems creating work that has depth and feeling and, you know, that strong sense. And my theory is that because they're so young and they don't have experiences, they're still trying to figure out who they are. You know, when you say this person's trying to figure out who they are, they're trying to figure out what their identity is. How do they fit in the world? What's their place in the world? So until an artist can have a true sense of who they are and their place within that world, it's difficult to create a piece of work that has power. I probably haven't created, well, hopefully I've created decent work up to this point, but I don't think I've created strong work until, last 10, 15 years maybe, because my identity started to solidify, who I am and my place within the world started to solidify over, and I'm fairly old now. Ask Pam. Although Pam is my older sister.
Yeah.
Let's see if she texts me about that one, right? But no, it's important. It's important.
No, I think I can appreciate that, and I know you're living in the bigger suburban area of Toronto, and that's a long way from Kahnawake, right? So, yeah. I can appreciate that finding some Haudenosaunee culture isn't as easy when you're surrounded by so many Anishinaabe, right? So,
yeah,
that's not a dig. That's not a dig. Just, but it is one of those things, and I'll share this with you. Yesterday, my wife was she's from Wikwemikong, and she was watching something online that someone in the community was putting on, and a lady got up and she started doing an opening in the language. She never spoke English. It was all in the language. And, my wife said, I got really verklempt. And I said, why? And she said, I haven't heard the language in so long. It felt so good.
Yeah.
Right. So, I can appreciate being a long way away from home. And that must have an influence too.
Oh yeah, it does. But I'm a little luckier than some people because I have fairly strong connections with my community, and I have friends at Six Nations that I can talk to, and there's a few of them from Kahnawake and a few of them from Six Nations. They live in Toronto, so occasionally we'll go for a coffee, and it's really nice to be able to reconnect. It's you just listening to them speak, because there is a lift to their speech. They do have a bit of an accent, and
for sure.
I mean, it brings back warm feelings of when I was younger, when I was growing up, because I spent probably 60% of my time on the reserve, even though we lived in Brampton at the time. My father felt it was strong for me to or important for me to spend time on the reserve with my family. So I stayed with my Dada and I stayed with my great aunts, and my fondest memories of growing up were on the reserve. And just I had a mini bike and I drive all over the place, and I'd visit the places, and eating cornbread and steak and all that sort of thing. And like I'm not a speaker. I don't speak Mohawk Ganingiha fluently. I chicken peck, so I pick my words, and I have phrases, and I have certain things that I can say. But when I do hear a word that I haven't heard as an adult, it triggers something that I remember as a kid. So I have a great aunt now. She's 87, and she's one of the last fluent speakers in our family. So I always go to her, and I ask her, what's garata mean, and all these words that I remember, and she starts laughing and she tells me, and we talk. So I talk to her at least once a week. So I try to maintain these different connections, and I have different relatives in Kahnawake that I connect with. So I'm lucky because I have those connections. But my brothers, they're younger than me, and they didn't go to the reserve when they were kids. They stayed in Brampton, and they didn't have as much of a connection to the culture as I do, because I'm about almost 10 years older than my youngest my brother directly below me. Okay. So I have different experiences than them.
Well, I'm just thinking, of your connections to Six Nations and whatnot, and I know that you were supposed to have an art show there.
Yeah.
At the Woodland Center, yeah. Right? And just I have to look at my notes. Oh yeah, it was called "We Are Still Here." Right? I wondered if you wanted to talk about that series a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Actually, I had two. That was last year. I had two solo
Oh,
shows. Yeah, one was at the Woodland Cultural Center, and it was "It's a Good Day to Be." And then I had another solo show at the Aurora Cultural Center, and that was "We Are Still Here."
yeah,
So it's
that's
two
the one.
shows. Yeah, I can talk about both of them if you like. The one in Aurora, "We Are Still Here." Um, I came up with these strong ideas and these strong feelings about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. And I wanted to see what happened was originally when I started going to classrooms and, telling stories and speaking, I was surprised at one of the classes. It was probably 9 years ago. So I think things have changed quite a bit, but I was in this grade 5 class. And it was, around 2:30. I was doing my stories and talking to all the kids, and they enjoyed it. And then I left around 3:30 when the bell rang, and I was just sort of loitering in the yard waiting to get picked up. And one of the little girls that was in my class, I saw her run to her father, and she sort of whispered in his ear, and she pointed at me, and I could make out the words, "There's a real Indian."
Mm.
And I was so surprised that, like I didn't think that it was that big of a deal, really. And I soon discovered right after that Indigenous people were as rare as unicorns, right? And I felt that it was important for me to go from classroom to classroom to, speak to the kids and tell them we are still here. We still exist, because their entire perspective or their entire knowledge comes from those older history books. And we're placed in history. Like, look at the classes where they learn about Indigenous culture. It's history, social science, things that typically talk about the past, not the present.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt it was important to try to change the way that they viewed us, even just to let them know that we were here. So I started from the very early ages. But that idea kept on rolling around in my head, and as an artist, these images started to pop up into my head on different things. Some of them were humorous, some of them weren't. So I started to create these paintings over the course of a year and a half. I had about 50 of them. I was offered a show, and I had a year and a half to prepare for it. So I started painting, and I was averaging about painting every week and a half, which is a huge, huge production, because most of my paintings are fairly large. And the ideas just kept on pouring out and pouring out. And I was working, 12, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week for almost a year and a half.
Wow.
And I created these paintings. So all of them deal with different social issues, different characterizations of Indigenous people. I try to attack or turn around stereotypes. There's one particular painting that I'm always afraid that people are going to take it the wrong way. It's called Pocahontas, and it's a large painting of an Indigenous woman in a jingle dress floating in the water. Now she's dead, so I tried to make the complexion and the face and everything look like she's dead. But that was triggered by Tina Fontaine, that was killed and found in the river. And it occurred to me that there's the Indian princess costumes, and there are words like calling a Native woman Pocahontas, and all of these very negative stereotypes, very very negative things that are contributing to missing and murdered Indigenous women, because it's placing them below as a substandard human, making them disposable. So I was throwing this image in the face of the viewer, saying, this is what happens when you call an Indigenous woman Pocahontas. This is what happens when you start wearing sexy princess outfits for Halloween. You're reducing the Indigenous women to object, to something that can be thrown away.
Yeah, and that's a very, very powerful image. And thank you for sharing that story, because that one's going to sit with people for a long time. And as it should be, and that's one of the things that we talk about is that objectification of our women
Mhm.
and how it's so wrong. And so I really appreciate that. You know, there's when I was looking at some of your pieces, um, there seems to be that juxtaposition that
Mhm.
you have going on, and I really like that because I think, as you said, you're trying to dispel some of those pieces, right?
Yeah, yeah. I like
Um,
to use humor as well, but occasionally I'll use the shock value of an image.
yeah, well, maybe talk about humor and how that plays a role in not only your work but even in our culture. We've had some other people talk about that, but what is maybe from your perspective? We like to laugh.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that I have a strange sense of humor, but I've over the years I've learned, or I believe that it's not really something that's unique to me as a person. It's a little bit more unique to the culture. People don't understand my sense of humor, and sometimes I'll go off on left field and something that I think is funny. Other people won't think it's funny, but a lot of the things that I find humorous are irony and that sort of thing, because it's you look at as an artist, you're working with connections. Like your mind is wired to look at different connections. So you'll see one thing, but it's going to branch off into all kinds of other ideas, other connections. So my humor is something like this. But Indigenous people, I don't know if everybody knows it, but they do have they're very, very funny, I suppose. They do have a sense of humor. They like to kid each other. Me and Pam, we like to joke around. We have our own standard jokes, and sometimes she'll cut me down, and that's just part of the way it is.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. I wasn't sure how well it would go over when I was in the Woodland Cultural Center. You as a solo artist, you stand up and you talk to the crowd. Well, the first thing I was going to say was I was going to look around and goes, "Oh, haven't seen so many Native people except in prison," and I wasn't sure how well that was going to go over. Maybe some people see you would get it, but I don't think some people may not get it. Or the other time when the last time I was doing a presentation for you, I was talking about my younger brother, and I'm telling you that he always makes fun of me. He tells me that I'm whipped, right? And I look at him and I go, "No, I'm not whipped. I'm matrilineal. I'm traditional." So I always like to tell people that he's been more colonized than me.
Well, there is truth to that, obviously.
Yeah, definitely. So things
Well,
like
there is a question
sure.
that came in, and it is kind of, here we are talking about humor, and I'm going to throw something completely on the other end of the spectrum.
Right.
And the question is, some of your recent work has been described as work that it's created in response to the widespread presence of trauma. So it's like trauma art. So I know you've talked about Tina Fontaine and some of the other influences. Maybe you can talk about that.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say that I'm, as far as some of the pieces that I have in We Are Still Here, I can't think of anything like when I'm dealing with trauma in my paintings, I'm not in your face with it. It's more of a very subtle sort of thing. One of the larger pieces that I did, it's a painting of a boy, a native boy. He must be like 4 or 5 years old, and he's bent over and he's picking up coins. And behind him, there's, it's a desolate wasteland. It's basically the prairies out west. There's, garbage. There's an old couch out there. There's a barrel with burning trash. And in the background, you'll see a train going across the horizon. You know, the sky's very dark. It's very traumatic. And I named the painting Happy Hunting Ground, because when people think of happy hunting ground, you know, they'll think of a lot of, you know, better things like green forests and that sort of thing. But this desolate area is where all Indigenous people were placed, or a lot of Indigenous people were placed, rather. And, you know, this kid picking up pennies off the ground, you know, this is what he needs to do.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the work dealing with trauma is very subtle. You have to examine the painting. You have to think about, how does it feel to you? You do need to have a sense of history, and you do need to have a sense of, you know, what's going on in society right now in order to understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, I don't like explaining what my paintings are about, because it's going to be different for everybody. Everybody's bringing their own identity, their own culture, their own experiences, and their own thoughts to a painting. So it's going to have a different effect on everybody. And just because, you know, one person has a different feeling about what it's about, it's completely different than what I created or what my ideas were. It doesn't mean it's not legitimate. It's still a valid opinion. So I don't like to bring in, you know, this is what this painting is about, and I created it for this reason.
Mm-hmm.
Another reason is, as a visual person, as an artist, these ideas and feelings that I have, they can't be expressed in words. The reason that I'm creating paintings is because I need to express these thoughts and these ideas with images. And in a way, by speaking about it, I'm sort of diminishing the effect of the image, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, it does. And I think it's an extremely important point to be made.
Mm-hmm.
Extremely, because we all have our own gifts, and, you know, we need to utilize those in our way. And some do it with words, others, like yourself, do it with images.
Mm-hmm.
So I totally appreciate that. And I think a lot of the art teachers that are on the call with us here today would say, yes, I totally understand that. And thank you for sharing it so I can explain it to my students. So we have another question here. I'll just read it out for you. Hey, Deron, a lot of your work seems to straddle elements of the modern world and elements of Indigenous culture.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could talk about the creative process you use to bring these two ways of being together in your work.
Oh, okay. Well, in a lot of cases, I think that duality is actually representative of my place in society. I consider my thoughts a lot more traditional than, say, my brothers. So, but I'm also this person who is living within a modern world. So a lot of those types of paintings, I'm trying to grasp my place within this society with the ideas that I have, with the traditional ideas and thoughts that I have. So in a lot of cases, I'm just trying to bring in different elements and trying to solidify into one image this construct. Does that answer?
Well, I'll have to wait to hear to see what the person asking the question feels.
Yeah, it's basically me dealing with, you know, where I am and, you know, within society and how I'm dealing with different things. You know, my creative process, I mean, if you want to get to more of a technical end of things, which is maybe what they wanted, is, you know, everything okay, you got your idea. It could be a feeling. It could be an image you got from a dream. It could be something that popped into your head. It could be a connection that you created or you found from something else. But you have this seed of an idea. Now, whenever I start out, I always sketch. So everything starts in a sketchbook, and they could be thumbnail sketches, because I'm trying to figure out, you know, what was it I was thinking about, and then it sort of builds from that point on, and it gets larger and larger and larger, until I have a fairly good idea of you know, the composition and the characters and what I want to do. And then from that point on, I'll take that sketch and I'll usually transfer it to the canvas. Now, I don't trace And I'm not even very particular about being exact from my sketchbook to the canvas. A lot of my work is freehand. I'm not sure if I have any videos. I have some videos on my website. I think I have a lot more on my Instagram account. But when I'm painting, I just sketch out the forms onto the canvas. So I discovered a long time ago that I'm not a line person, I'm a form person. So I have difficulties sketching with lines, but I can create something from form. So everything will work from the idea in the sketchbook to the form on the canvas, and then I'll just go from there.
Oh, I like that. That's good. And I think, I think it's an important part when artists are sharing to go through that creative process, right? Because everybody again has a different approach. So I know that I certainly appreciate learning that.
Mm-hmm.
There's an interesting question that was posed earlier, and it is, if I can just read it out. Do you believe that Indigenous art can be created without an inherent sourcing from First Nations identity or identity politics?
Mm-hmm. Run that by me again. Yeah,
because you have a strong background and cultural background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And in your art, you're focusing on Indigenous and indigeneity, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that someone could do Indigenous art even without that background?
No, I don't think so. I think if they did, it would be appropriation of some sort. Now, if you were a non-Indigenous person doing Indigenous art or Indigenous ideas, I would believe that that would be cultural appropriation because you're taking somebody else's identity and you're creating art, you're creating a product from it. Now, if you're an Indigenous person and you didn't grow up within that culture, again, it's not cultural appropriation. Perhaps it's cultural exploration. You're learning about your culture, or you're exploring ideas about your culture. But I think that if a non-Indigenous person tries to create, let's not even call it Indigenous art. Let's just say they try to create art using Indigenous identity or Indigenous social issues, then they're not staying in their lane. They're not working with their own identity and their own culture, which is what an artist should do.
Mm-hmm. I know, I remember a few years back, it was actually an English teacher did an assignment and they were talking about residential schools. Mm-hmm. And they assigned their students, we would like you to express yourself in your learning around residential schools. And someone did an art piece. Mm-hmm. They actually did it kind of like, I don't know if they got some inspiration from Christy Belcourt when she did the stained glass, but mm-hmm. they kind of had like it opened up and it had kind of some artwork in it and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Like how would you think of that?
That's okay, because they're still filtering it through their own identity. You know what I mean? It's their impressions of these issues through their own identity. So it's being filtered through themselves. What I was talking about specifically were artists like Amanda P., who started to create woodland style art as a professional artist and claimed that it was her, her identity, I suppose, her art. Mm. But I think that, what you just expressed, I think that that would be okay, because they're not stating that, I'm an Indigenous person creating this art. They're indicating that, this is my ideas on what these issues are, and this is what I've created.
Yeah, and I think that's always a tricky one, especially for art teachers who are studying, the grade 9 course at high school is expressing Indigenous cultures, contemporary Indigenous, right? So I think that's where, you know, the teachers wouldn't mind some ideas of what they could explore or how they could do it.
Mhm.
That sort of thing, as opposed to, I know you for sure you're not saying copying because
Yeah.
that's the appropriation, but maybe you could just have some tips there.
I have various ideas on this, and it's a very heated conversation. Now, as a teacher, as an art teacher as well, I bring in Indigenous issues. So I'm always struggling with the idea of, what am I doing? Is this right? But I feel that students up until a certain age, they have, I'm not going to say right, but they have a license to explore different cultures, including Indigenous cultures, and to create work filtered through their own, lens of identity about those subjects. It's when they go out into the working world as a professional artist and they try to use Indigenous ideas when they're not Indigenous, that's when you have a problem. But while you're a student, you're learning. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it's okay for you to work with those ideas. Now, it's also difficult because, Indigenous people weren't allowed to practice their culture up until around 1959, 1960. It was against the law. They couldn't, perform ceremonies. They couldn't do anything, strangely enough, unless you were entertaining non-Indigenous people. Then you could put on the feathers and the leather and the headdress, and you could, dance around to entertain them. But, if you had a serious ceremony, it was against the law. You could be arrested. So at this point in time right now, because things are opening up, Indigenous artists, Indigenous people feel very sensitive about non-Indigenous people practicing art related to our culture, because it was taken away from us, and we're finally starting to rediscover it and get it back. So we feel that it's something that we need to learn to do before other people can start working with it as well. Because, as an artist as well, it's very common for a student to copy masterworks. So, students of Rembrandt would copy his paintings. Even right now, if you go into an atelier, go to the New York Academy of Art, there's a course where you go into a museum and you copy the master works. So either sketching or painting or whatnot. It's part of the learning process to learn how to be an artist, is rather copy other artists' work, because you're learning from that process. So, on the one hand, I find that it could be cultural appropriation, and that's a sliding scale. I mean, in 1970, there was no such thing. Right now, it's very sensitive, and it's very acute, so you have to be careful. But it's a difficult thing to express. It depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah, I think it's one of the hardest things to talk about because, well, one, I'm not an artist, right? So that's why I always ask the question. And I think maybe that's why my suggestion is always to, explore the issues using Indigenous art, such as your work around Tina Fontaine, exploring other works of art around murdered and missing Indigenous women, and how other Indigenous artists have portrayed their feelings around that. And then allow the students to come up with their own ideas of how would they want to portray that, right? I don't know. That's just, it's those explorations, I think. And I certainly appreciate, your point around they're teenage students who are exploring their own identity, and there's certain, they have certain leeway, right? To do things and express and learn things, because that's what it's all about, is learning. So I really appreciate that. Yeah. Just another question here, asking if you could name 2 or 3 First Nations artists whose work who you particularly appreciate, and what is it about the work that connects with you?
Yeah. I've always liked Arthur Schilling. I remember when I was, a young kid, I used to spend a lot of time at the McMichael Art Gallery, and there's, paintings. At the time, there were paintings of his, being displayed. And I used to love those. And recently, I discovered, well, 10 years, I discovered his son, Travis Schilling. I love his work. Really, really good. There's a few others. I like, what's his name? I can't pronounce his indigenous name, so I'm not going to try. Lawrence Paul. He's a West Coast artist, and he paints in more of a surreal sort of art style. But he uses different iconology from his culture. So you'll have the different masks with the big eyes and that sort of thing. And he gives his paintings really great titles. Like I wish I had a copy to show you, but it's essentially these sort of creatures. They're like stick figures almost, and they have the carved masks. Like they're wearing these sort of things, and then in the background there's these non-indigenous scientists on a ladder in lab coats, trying to put a piece of sky back into this big hole. And the name of the title is Red Man Watching White Man Trying to Fix Hole in Sky. So he has these really strange paintings, but he has these really great titles. So I really appreciate his work. But Travis Schilling, I like his work because a lot of my taste in art for myself, they go towards more impressionist type of art style, looser brush strokes, not as much detail, that sort of thing. And these artists exhibit those types of those ideas. Travis Schilling has some really great ideas as well, and I like the way that he places things together.
Yeah, I'd never heard of Travis, so I'm gonna look him up. So that's really good.
He's in Aurelia.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I figured.
Yeah, I'm gonna have hopefully I'm gonna have another solo show up at the Aurelia Museum of Art and History this summer. It was supposed to be going on right now, but they postponed it until things open up. So yeah, I was hoping to be able to meet him up there.
Yeah, and these times have really caught everyone off guard. And I always wonder from an artist perspective, whether you're a visual artist or a writer, have you found that everything has kind of dampened your creativity, or do you find that I'm not a lot has changed, right? Everybody's different.
A lot of artists are joking about this, and I made a joke about it the first time we went in lockdown. Things really hasn't changed for the artist. Like typically, okay, I'll talk about myself. I can only talk about myself, but typically I spend 8 to 10 hours in the studio. I'll go upstairs for a coffee or I'll go for something to eat. But, typically I'll spend all my time in the studio. I'm isolating myself all the time. So that's the way we are. So it hasn't really affected me unless I have to go out and get some groceries or, something like that. I can't go to the art store, so I'm running out of art supplies. But, let's say I had all the art supplies and all the food that I needed, nothing would change for me because I spend all my time down here anyway. I find that my mood will go up and down and my art will reflect that. But you just try to keep on working through it. I'm working on different things. They don't really have a lot of meaning. I'm just doing exercises to sharpen my skills because drawing and painting, if you don't exercise that muscle, you're going to lose it. So a lot of the paintings I've been creating are things that just sharpen my skills.
Yeah, and that was going to actually be the next question I asked, just to kind of wrap things up a little bit, was what is it that you're working on? But I think that's really good. Mm-hmm. You have to keep working on those skills to keep sharp, as just like athletes have to. So people are having to get creative and exercising and working out and doing all of those things that they normally would do.
Yeah.
So I think I have one more question.
Sure.
Maybe I don't. Usually the chat box will populate and I'll lose it and I'll have to come back to it.
Mhm.
But no, I think that's really good. And I've certainly really appreciated our conversation, and I thank you for your perseverance in working through our technical difficulties. But in my opinion, it was well worth the wait. So Deron, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
And thank everyone else. I'd just like to take the time to thank everyone else for your patience as we work through those. And a big shout out to our friend Pam, who took a little beating today, but
Used to it.
but she's a strong Anishinaabe woman. She can handle herself.
Yeah. I keep on complimenting her and telling her that she seems more Mohawk.
That is the utmost compliment right there.
I think so too. I think so too.
Well, again, thank you so much, Deron, and everyone else. And I look forward to future conversations. Everyone, take care.
You too. Take care.